we've got lots of food for thought, I think, from those four presentations. I'd just pick out a couple of things. I think Sarah's point about the need to have capability, people being able to use, being digitally literate was hugely important. From Simon's presentation, I thought the piece about the convergence between Wi-Fi and mobile was interesting. Zaid, I liked your comment about the fact that people used to say, why do we need 3G? And now people are saying, why do we need 4G? And I'm sure that 2,000 years ago, people were saying, why do we need this iron stuff? Because bronze has served us very well for the last 500 years. That's the same issue. And then in Rahim's presentation, the answer to the question, why do we need to evolve, came in his early slides about the economic benefit, the economic importance of connectivity. So that's kind of, those are just some of the things that I picked out of that huge amount. I'm definitely going to go and look at these slides in more detail afterwards because there's an enormous amount of useful and interesting and new to me stuff, certainly. What we'd now like to do is kind of move forward with exploring what, on the basis of what we've just heard, how do we move forward? How does Scotland move forward to achieve the vision of you can use your device, anytime, anywhere, by 2020? And I think the kind of structure of the discussion, basically anything you want to ask would just kind of go with the flow. But I know colleagues from Scottish Government are particularly keen to explore the kind of the what is it that Scottish Government needs to do to get to that vision, both in terms of the short term and in terms of the kind of the longer term targets towards 2020. So that's kind of one of the areas we'd like to explore. But if I can kind of throw things open to the floor now, and as I can kind of remind you, you could say your name and organisation and wait for the mic. So we've got a question.
Yeah. Hi, it's John McCracken, Vodafone. There was a lot of discussion about small cell technology, and it's more of a point than as a question. But one of the challenges that we have is the same challenge that we've had for many years, and it's the rollout of the macrocellular network. So we still have those problems to overcome before we can effectively move on to the small cell technology. And this applies not only for this applies to the upgrades that we need to do for 4G. So we need to go for planning consent, and that is one of the things that slows us down. And we have many problems in Glasgow, in particular, obtaining permission to roll out macro cells. So I think that's one thing that we'd like to see.
Yep, we have a question over there.
Errol Hepsider from 3 UK. I think it's, in a way it is quite a good point. John made. Coverage is the key. If you don't have coverage, whatever your technology you put there doesn't mean anything. You have to be able to put some sites to provide some kind of signal, and you can overlay the technology, either 3G, 4G, or 5G, and then whatever capacity you need, you can provide the service. That's just I wanted to add to John's comment. But my question actually is, Sarah is saying actually they will be providing by 2017 a nationwide LTE network. I believe that's the date, I believe, Ofcom requirement. And we heard from Rahim that we may need some kind of different kind of deployment strategy. How should we deploy networks? Should we be considering not maybe 5G in 5 years' time, but are we going to revisit all our deployment, all our cost today, and maybe you do a big change when the 5G comes into picture? What do you think, Rahim?
No, it's the same. You do not need to change the whole infrastructure moving from 4G to 5G. Okay, it's the same changes as it was when you went from 2G to 3G, 3G to 4G. And I disagree that coverage is everything. I tell you that. Why? Because all of you guys, operators, the 5 operators we have in UK, you provide a very decent coverage. It is about capacity you provide. The communication bill hasn't issued yet, but some ideas there, 2 megabits per second and 30 megabits per second. When you provide that, how do you guarantee you provide these 2 megabits per second and 30 megabits per second? It is not about coverage. And another thing is having the sites to put the small cells. Physically, there is a certain distance between the lampposts, which you cannot go smaller than that. And that you are still restricted with, even if you have access to those sites, with the size of the cells that you're going to deploy. So I think talking about generation, you should not fear that it's going to be, you have to throw all your infrastructure up in the air and roll out a new infrastructure completely. It will be as much change as it was from 3G to 4G.
Yeah, just for the sake of spice, I'm going to disagree with Raheem here. I think capacity is clearly very important, and meeting demand, profitably will matter for operators. But that's really an operator's problem. That's not society's problem, and it's not a user's problem. You get kind of hygiene factors, and then you get motivators. And I think coverage is a hygiene factor, and it's easy to say that coverage doesn't matter when you've got it. When you haven't, it's everything. So I think it is critical. And on the other hand, the way capacity shortages hit users is not, oh dear, there's not enough capacity in the network. It's a terrible experience, a terrible user experience. And for me, and I think it was actually bound up in one of Raheem's slides, one of the more colourful, spiky ones. What we need to find is ways of delivering a great user experience to everybody. The fact that you're geographically challenged, that you happen to be sitting, on the edge of a cell rather than very close to a base station, shouldn't be a reason for you to have a lousy service. So what future networks need, whether it's 4G, 5G or whatever, is to be able to spread the goods out and provide a great service to everybody. And there are ways of doing that. Capacity is one of the things along the way that you need to do to deal with that, but it isn't actually, for me, the driving point. And I'll say one other thing too, which is when you actually work out how many places need the very high density of capacity in the long term, it's actually very small. The amount of infrastructure you need is much bigger if you want to deliver a great service to everybody. So you're going to put some of this infrastructure in the heart of the city to deal with the capacity peak. But if the suburbs want 2 times, 3 times, 5 times the consistent user experience, then you need to spread them everywhere. And then, yes, absolutely, then the planning challenges really hit home, and and John's organisation needs to explain the benefits of having these sites there, as well as the issues of being able to see them, I think.
Mike?
Well, an awful lot of questions, but first question, I suppose, at other events, you hear an awful lot of talk about fibre to the premises being critically important. I'd be quite interested in your perspective on, is fibre to the premises an important element of an infrastructure which is focused around mobility and effectiveness? And second question is around this thing about not really being 4G, whereas actual 4G is being rolled out elsewhere. How do we, why shouldn't we be rolling out proper 4G here if that's going to be take us to the cutting edge? And finally, I think coming back to the point you were making, the perspective that's coming out here is that it's a very complicated market. There's technologies moving very quickly, and things will happen for a large chunk of the country. I suppose the question is, what are the things we can do to make the stuff happen here quicker, encourage the market to make things happen quicker here than elsewhere? And that's without getting into the issues of coverage, which I think is rather a different debate.
So, I'd actually like to dispel the idea that there's anything not proper about the 4G being rolled out here. Zahid made the absolutely correct point that in pure ITU-R terminology, actually there isn't any such thing as 4G, but the extent to which it exists, it needs LTE Advanced. But this is a continuum. The LTE Advanced adds a few features to LTE, but uses exactly the same network, exactly the same spectrum, and just adds some bells and whistles, which are an absolutely evolutionary path over time, just as 3G has evolved. The stuff that's being rolled out in the States, in South Korea, is the same stuff that's being rolled out here, from soup to nuts. The point about fibre to the home, though, I think dovetails with that. I sit on the Ofcom Spectrum Advisory Board, and we debate all sorts of interesting things. But the one theme is the only debate in broadband networks, wireless or fixed, is exactly where the boundary between the cables and the wireless bit goes. Every wireless network needs both, and it used to confuse people when I used to design in building systems, and we'd turn up with reels of cable and say, this is a wireless system. What are all these wires doing here? Well, we clearly need the elements of the fixed infrastructure, whether wired or wireless, to get as close to users as possible. And if it's economically sensible to get fibre to the home, then that's fantastic. But it isn't in and of itself, a key and critical single success factor. There are lots of other ways of getting there, given the right spectrum, given enthusiastic planning laws. And one thing I would say about giving, speed to the question, making things happen fast, part of the answer is a lesson to learn from Wi-Fi, which is that Wi-Fi evolved not because it was designed to do some great things, but because users could get their hands on it and get on with doing it. That's why the apps ecosystem evolved as well. And I think there is something for mobile operators to think about here. How can they get parts of their network in the hands of their end users to fashion in their own image? How can businesses create wireless networks which interact with operators' networks and deliver the service that they need locally? Sarah put up something about, I think it's called Intelligent Analytics or something like that, which is about sharing information from a mobile network with some of their customers. I think that's absolutely in the right direction for that.
So I think the point that we're all coming round to is that it's a very complex system with some complex economics associated with it, and we have to find ways of working collaboratively together to piece it all together in a way which is win-win-win. And I think that's one of the things which makes me very nervous, is that that customers' expectations are going to get higher and higher. Their propensity and willingness to pay for services is not going to get higher and higher and higher. In fact, if anything, it's going in the opposite direction. So if we want to achieve our ambitions, we have to find win-win-win solutions to all these factors, rather than thinking it is a naturally in and of itself something which consumers want to pay money for, if that makes sense.
And I guess in my day job hat, I'd reiterate the point about the planning system, and that I don't want to bang on about it because I've banged on about it to several people in this room already, but we do have a planning system in Scotland which makes it harder to gain planning permission for a site than it would be for a corresponding site in England. And it's not just, it takes longer, it's more expensive, and you're more likely to get turned down. So that's one of the issues that we have here. Sorry.
So I just wanted to add a few points. And I think the two of the biggest problems in wireless industry is the coverage and capacity problems. And you have already seen, like, it can start a discussion just among ourselves about coverage and capacity. One of the ideas, like when LTE was a new technology, one of the ideas that was proposed was, why not start LTE as small cells initially, and then actually build macro on top of that. So maybe start as a femtocells in the home, which are LTE capable, and then you will have macro networks to provide seamless coverage everywhere. It gained a lot of good response from operators, but I don't know, I haven't seen that happening. There are lots of small cells in Korea, especially, and even in Japan, because SoftBank, I think, SoftBank, isn't it, which gave away free LTE femtocells to everyone who wanted it.
3G. 3G femtos.
Or was it 3G one? Yes. But the thing is, you can have a similar concept for LTE. And if all these small cells, if they are open, like anybody can actually use them, then it can provide a lot of this coverage issues. It can resolve a lot of coverage issues. Another thing is like we have the cellular evolution path, and we will all talk about cellular evolution path because that's our main focus. The industry is also working heavily on Wi-Fi. When they talk about carrier Wi-Fi, and another one is the hotspot 2.0, which means everything would, as long as there is a support for the Wi-Fi, you can have a seamless roaming between Wi-Fi hotspots, even between cellular and Wi-Fi. This can definitely help, especially in places where the mobile signal might not reach, inside a shopping center or in some of the areas like in big buildings. This can certainly help. So I think we should not just look at one aspect, like we should look at a various combination of different kind of things, like Wi-Fi, small cells, and how they can all interwork together.
If I could just say a couple of the things that Zahid mentioned there sparked off something. There is a spectrum policy dimension here, which can relate to what gets rolled out. For example, Zahid mentioned what some called an inside-out, rollout plan, where you, instead of starting with the big macros, you start with the small cells and work your way outwards from there. Well, how could that happen? Why would an operator be in a position to roll out a network in that unusual way? Well, they'd need to not have some big macros to start with, but they'd need some spectrum that was suitable for femtocells, which can, for example, be high-frequency spectrum. Well, it just so happens that one of the outcomes of the auction recently was an operator with a big fixed network, no macro cell spectrum, as it were, but some spectrum now very suitable for small cells. So we haven't seen the last of that. In the US, they're currently looking at the particular frequency band, the 3.5 gigahertz band. They called it Citizens Broadband. And one of the ways they might make that spectrum available is that venue owners have the rights to place things in that spectrum in their environment. And it's a core LTE band, or LTE Advanced for that matter, so that the venue owner could provide a bunch of cells and could provide an interface to an operator such that they could deliver services inside their building for the benefit of their workforce, employees, visitors, whatever, and those devices could connect straightforwardly into a wide area network for an operator. So I'm not necessarily a big fan of using spectrum policy as a tool to bludgeon people with, but in the mix it can play a role in encouraging some models to evolve that might not have done otherwise.
Yep, gentleman here.
David Byers, Scottish Enterprise. Picking up specifically on the coverage point, and a question really for Sarah. Given the license obligation for 95% coverage, perhaps just a point for clarification, but your map at the beginning of your presentation very evidently seemed to suggest that the Western Isles and the Northern Isles might not have coverage that the mainland would have. Is that indicative or realistic?
You probably didn't read my small print. I mean, it says at the bottom, illustrative only. It was a slide which was intended just to make a little bit of a compare and contrast. It wasn't intended to represent the actual situation in the Highlands and Islands. I think this is it, so forgive me for that.
Okay, it's just the Isle of Wight was green, but Stornoway wasn't. Thanks.
Can I just follow that up, because clearly Sarah doesn't want to announce her rollout plans, and that makes sense. What I do see amongst operators overall is a completely different tempo to their LTE rollout than we saw for 3G. The coverage obligation might be part of that, but it really isn't. It's only a part of it. The rate at which upgrades are happening, the desire to be different, the desire to focus on a really great experience even inside buildings is there at a level it just wasn't for many years with 3G. So I think good things are coming.
And I think we saw from Raheem's presentation, that you can see from the future, whatever assumptions you're making about what's going to happen, it is substantial growth in demand for data services. And so the whole momentum towards rolling out 4G is quite naturally there. it's not a question of whether will customers want it, it's a question of how do we meet customers' demands.
Indeed, so 3G was clearly built when we didn't know what people were going to
Yes,
do with it.
exactly. And
Today,
now it's
people are already
completely
doing it, already demanding it. You know, it's satisfying a thirst that's tangibly there.
Just one small point. The traffic I presented, the traffic growth, that does not include M2M traffic, machine to machine. So,
Right?
Thanks. I mean, I'd quite like to explore a bit further the issue of a collaborative approach in the context of competition versus collaboration, not necessarily a versus, but how you get the balance right. And we've clearly got areas where there's high competition in Scotland and areas where there is no competition in Scotland. And there are issues of infrastructure convergence, I think, which maybe would operate more effectively in areas where there is no competition. Though how you can converge non-existent infrastructure, I'm not sure. Basic question though, what would you see as the sort of features, where should collaboration focus in order to deliver either good things faster or something where you wouldn't have 4G otherwise, which is, I think, the 2%, which for Scotland is 5%.
I've got three points on that. Three ingredients to make it happen. One is open interoperability, making devices and pieces of networks work with each other. Some of that happens anyway. It's usually in the industry's interest to make things interoperable, but sometimes there are hidden reasons why that doesn't happen. And actually there's a role for regulators and policymakers in encouraging it to happen. So, secondly, putting stuff in the hands of the actual customers, as I mentioned before. You know your business better than any operator possibly can, and allowing you to do some things to fashion it in your own image helps. And incidentally, it helps operators too, because when enterprises and private individuals get the opportunity to do that, they actually put their hands in their pockets and spend money on the infrastructure that would otherwise be uneconomical for the operators. But thirdly is actually to recognise that the operators have got a job to do as well. They do play a role, and they join dots which wouldn't be there otherwise. They ensure that things work nationally and not only regionally. They ensure that things work when you go from country to country, and it gives you somebody to speak to when the service isn't what you'd hoped for. So a completely DIY approach I don't think actually delivers. So I think those three together can deliver something.
Do you want to?
I just want to add one point in terms of the cooperation and collaboration. Again, it somehow is related to the coverage issue that we discussed. Why T-Mobile and Orange, they join forces in infrastructure sharing? Why Telefonica and Vodafone are joining forces? Because the assets and the coverage is not the only differentiator for the operators to compete. It's the service they provide and customer care that is more important, understanding the customers, not the number of base stations. So the nature, the business model in terms of collaboration and cooperation has changed compared to 25 years ago when it was purely voice, only service was voice. So the coverage was for single traffic service. And now, 25 years later, after the first introduction of the cellular system, whatever we do now, we need to take into account the evolution of the business model. And I think our UK is pioneering this in the whole world. When we talk about infrastructure sharing into the rest of the world, people say, is that really a fact? They do? I said, yes, it is. Because that's not a differentiator for the mobile operators to have one have a pink network and another have a blue network. Is about customer care.
Ivan Marjanovic, Scottish Government, as a Be There customer from 2005 and an iPhone user from very early 2007, especially with on Wi-Fi through O2. I haven't found the answer in your presentation today. What we're going to do with the actual avalanche of M2M devices we are expecting in the next 10 years, maybe. We've been talking about the end-user experience, about people's phones and their user data. But what about M2M?
I just want to say there are many solutions for machine-type communication. And one is the proprietary, some of them are IEEE standard-based solutions. And another solution is based on the cellular technology. And in my opinion, I've studied all these three different approaches. Mobile operators who own the cellular technology and operate the cellular technology, they understand the customers better. And this is the best solution to carry machine-type communication on top of these cellular networks. And anything else is extremely risky because it's not tested technology, security issues, the user data, and who has access to that one. Mobile operators, they know, they understand this. And reliability of technology and management of the network. And that M2M or machine-type communication should be part of the specification of the next generation system. It cannot just focus on purely super fast broadband communication, but it should be designed for both. Low data rate as well as high data rate. I think I didn't mention that one later in my presentation, but this is the key.
If I can just add, so when I showed about these different releases, the standard releases of 3GPP, so 3GPP has already taken into account all this machine, in the standard term is rather than M2M, it's machine type communication, MTC. And they have got a lot of features where they actually take care about how to handle these millions and millions of devices, because the term that is used is 50 million devices by 2025. So they have, oh, sorry, yeah. Yeah, 50 billion devices. So yes, of course, they have taken this into account. There are features in release 10, release 11, which make sure that, you know, when suddenly there is this avalanche of signaling, and there is already some other kind of communication going on, which is maybe higher priority, all these lower priority devices, you actually bar them for certain time. This feature is known as extended access barring. So yes, 3GPP is taking care. And the good thing about LTE or 4G or LTE Advanced is because it uses a shared channel rather than 3G. 3G has dedicated as well as shared component, but there is always a dedicated overhead. So in 4G, the way it was designed is because of a shared channel, any number of devices could be there and they can all access data, and generally it should work fine. That's the intention. If it doesn't work fine, it will be fixed in the future release.
Hi, Iqbal Bedi from Analysys Mason. I've got two questions, one for Sarah and one for Dr. Simon. First one for Sarah is, you know, with the 4G rollout plans and the obligations that come with that, where does that leave your 3G plans in Scotland? And do you have a view of what percentage of sites roughly in 3G sites you'll be converting into 4G?
So I obviously my slide wasn't as effective as I wanted it to be. One of the points I wanted to make was that it's not just about 4G, it is about improving 3G coverage as well as part of the network that we're rolling out. So we would see significant improvements in 3G coverage as well. So in terms of sort of site numbers, I think we've got something like 1650 macro cells in Scotland, and we'll be moving to something like 2,200 macro cells. So that's the sort of order, it's about a third again.
Okay, thanks. And a question for Simon. With all the kind of city wireless schemes and the land grab that's been going on in terms of, you know, free Wi-Fi access, we've spoken to a number of MNOs, and, you know, the feeling is generally that it's more of a headline statement, you know, go to Westminster, that kind of thing. Virgin Media leads Bradford. How sustainable do you think that is in your view?
I think it's very sustainable, but there's a whole sequence of events. So this kind of lamp grab that's going on, in many ways, is going on in advance of the actual demand. We're working with a number of these folks that, councils and so on, and there are things to really draw into the parallels of what this event is about in trying to align what happens with the industry with the benefits that you're trying to achieve for society. The councils, provided that infrastructure, typically have some goals of their own. They want to do some things for their citizens, and they want to do it now, this year. On the other hand, the demand for small cells coming from mobile operators, there is some, and there's a lot going on, but in terms of large numbers and every city centre, it's a little way off yet. So the challenge there is aligning that kind of social desire for better connectivity with the actual situation that mobile operators are in. There's a real question about city Wi-Fi. City Wi-Fi can do something, it can bring some benefits in some places, but there's a real challenge in funding it. It's a cost, it's not something that operators are providing today as something that they're really keen to provide. It's something they want paying for, even the most enthusiastic Wi-Fi providers doing that. So that's very difficult to align. What I see, the sort of best case scenario, and I am seeing that in some of these cases, is that providers recognise the city's goals and find a way to do that within the overall process. That the process, however, is considered as much as anything preparing the ground, cleaning the pipes of the processes, including in planning, where you get the planning officers sitting together with those trying to deliver the citizen benefits and try and get them to be joined up in the process. And then kind of gluing those together, we've been talking about mobile operators and fixed operators, but it's really not like that. There's people with spectrum, people with customers, people with cables. What I do see, though, is that those sorts of networks look a bit more like traditional fixed networks than they do like traditional mobile networks. They have a lot of fibre in the street. They have a lot of, large number of nodes in the network, not 10 or 20,000, but 1 million or 10 million nodes in the network, and those operators know how to do that. So what I see is today, operators that have street-level infrastructure in large amounts are the people that are facilitating the access today, but are doing it in a way that will allow when mobile operators have that need, there is a platform for them to get onto at the appropriate time when the need for better capacity coverage or user experience is there. But it's a pretty, as you can tell from the length of my response, it's a pretty intricate puzzle to fit together.
So what should we do in Scotland in order to fit that puzzle together?
Well, I think the planning piece is a big deal. Rateable value matters. Get clear on what it is, whether there is a rateable value. There's a big cloud of uncertainty floating around in there at the moment. It's putting people off from doing anything. Recognise that there is a changing landscape of operators. Look how operators in the UK looked 5 years ago. Look how it looks today. Project forward 5 and 10 years. So don't assume the operator landscape will be the same. And make sure the agreements for this infrastructure don't sell the future on the premise of today.
Hi, Steve Sharrock of Tyco Electronics. Just going on Raheem's point on efficiency of networks and looking at energy and how we, look at the spectrum reuse, and also Simon's point on, in the rural areas where we have this sort of infrastructure there, and really, as it pointed at yourself, maybe Sarah, is to say what appetite is there from, Vodafone, O2, and everything everywhere to maybe share some of that network in the rural areas that gives that capacity or the coverage in some areas out to those areas. And also, it strikes me also we need some sort of smarter networks in the inner cities and the business areas where you're able to switch that capacity away from business districts to somewhere else where, at the weekend it might, stadiums and stuff like that. Are you looking at smarter networks, and are you looking also at the ability to share in the rural areas more?
So I think we've talked about one of the major changes in our whole industry, moving to sharing infrastructure assets while maintaining the possibility of having competing networks we all have our own spectrum and compete for service above that. So I think that's a major, it's a major change across the whole of what's happening in the UK. I referenced an example, Highlands and Islands. That was something that happened and was something which all operators got together to do. So, I don't think the door would be closed to that type of thing. I think our focus at the moment, though, is very much on building the collaboration we've got to share infrastructure between ourselves and our partners, Vodafone. So I wouldn't exclude it, but I think at the moment that's where we're focusing.
And what about the smarter networks? Do you think?
I think I'm going to defer that question to my learned colleagues because I'm afraid I'm not technical enough to know quite how you do that with radio access. But
Okay, I personally believe that even shorter than 10 years from now, all the operators, 5 operators we have in UK, including BT, will be having a joint and shared infrastructure. It will be like other utilities. You have the water system, you have the electricity system. The service providers are different. Differentiation is not on infrastructure. And to reduce the cost, to reduce cost of energy, cost of equipment, etc. I think that is the way it is going. And I think the second part of your question was something I forgot.
Smart networks.
Smart, yes. There is a new technology that's been developed or is being highly researched. It's called software-defined networking. So you can remotely, it is like intelligent networking, IN, but it's much easier for the operators to allocate resources dynamically to different regions, to different businesses' priority, or to introduce a new service application into the network at a much reduced cycle, less than 12 months. And so that sort of technology in parallel, because most of my presentation was on the radio technology side. I didn't explore, apart from Sarah, we talked about big data. There's another third important technology is software-defined networking and infrastructure virtualization. And that is coming up.
I have to come back on Raheem's point about network sharing. Raheem set out a world in the future where it was just one big network and there was no differentiation at that level. I profoundly disagree with that.
Well, I didn't say there is no differentiation. I said differentiation,
At
the
the
game
network.
is changing.
Yeah.
It is not about somebody having pink network and somebody having blue network.
I'm with you on the colour, certainly. But, actually a world in which there's only one network, but there's only differentiation at the service layer is quite a nightmarish world, I think. A world in which there's no real competition.
Well, you can switch your electricity provider in a matter of 12 hours.
No, I mean, so I fully agree that services are what the consumers care about, and there should be competition at that layer. And, the shape of the macro cell tower is neither here nor there. And I fully agree as well that the UK is in a leading position in terms of infrastructure sharing, and for some very good reasons. That saves money for the operators, which translates into more benefit, and it actually gets them to more sites than would otherwise have been the case, which is good for consumers because there's better coverage. But the piece that I disagree with is that there is no scope for competition at the level of the network. I think there's huge scope for competition.
It's a service application. That's it.
Well,
that's it.
That's
yeah.
the,
Why
so
not? That's a big area for competition.
I think that's a huge area for competition.
Yeah, exactly. It is not a bad.
My point
I
is
have my base station on top of the
that's
cathedral.
right.
Somebody else has it.
My
on the
point is,
lower
it isn't
part.
the only area for competition. And as networks become more and more about not just macro cells, and they do get smarter, I think the way you configure your network and those network assets, whether they're in the right places for the consumers and so on, become scope for operators to be different. And that's good for customers because they get people trying harder.
Even managing, yeah, sorry, but as the end user who lives in Glasgow, who's been waiting for 5 weeks to get his PSTN and broadband installed, as well, 2 months of tough negotiations with one of the MNOs to get Femtocell at home. And we can see companies changing hands. BDR was sold to Sky for 200 million, Ubiquitous to Cisco for 310 million US. My question really is, since 2010, when I read all about femtocells in Mobile Europe, it's here, it's available now, you can take it. It's 2013, and it's still really hard to get femtocell solution for your home, picocell for your SME, PSTN, broadband, fiber to the home, fiber to the premises, etc. The real question is how far away Scotland is from the position where we will be able to get your broadband, wireless, femtocell as business as usual.
First of all, femtocell, when it was introduced, I didn't believe in it because the business model that operators had. This is my spectrum, you cannot share it, this is my access point, it's not going to be shared. And I said, it's not going to beat Wi-Fi. And that's why Femtoforum as well, they changed the name to Small Cells, because femtocell is not selling. It's not a viable solution, the way that operators provide that service. And what was the second part of your question?
How far away are consumers and SMEs in Scotland from HetNet, picocell, small cell, all-in-one solution that they can use at home, in their offices, so they have this ubiquity.
I have to say that at
connection.
home, I think there is a myth that we need to clarify here. People say 85% of the data is from home, or 70, 80%, which was femto technology was based on. That's why they said we should cover the indoor. But the data traffic I mentioned was from the mobile networks. Fortunately or unfortunately, the busy hour, indoor busy hour, does not coincide with the busy hour outdoor. So we cannot say that if we have more indoor network, would relieve the pressure on the outdoor cellular networks. Because the time people are at work, daytime, go home in the evening or whatever, or weekend, and this is a completely different busy hour. So one cannot, by improving the coverage, indoor coverage, by using different technology, when people are not at home, what's the point?
Just a quick question. I do a lot of work from home. I have colleagues that I deal on a regular basis, Monday to Sunday in US and in Canada. So therefore, when I moved here, I had only one bar, no matter which operator I was on. I was on 3 different operators.
You should use
Let me
Wi-Fi.
finish. And the question is, I just needed connectivity all the time because I just couldn't stand next to my window in one room to get connectivity in Scotland. So the question is, what should I do? How I'm going to get my indoor connectivity and do my work?
Use Wi-Fi.
What about mobile?
But you have my phone. You can have Wi-Fi and cellular
People are
system.
still ringing me on my mobile phone. They're not
But
ringing me on Viber,
It's cheaper for you.
FaceTime,
Wi-Fi.
Skype.
It's cheaper, it's more available, it's higher bandwidth, and rather than just providing coverage from outdoor cellular to indoors.
I think people here, they need both, especially if they're living in the city center.
The city center is a different case.
So I think you need both, in short, and both is coming. It's there in the technology today. A number of acquisitions, Ericsson, Bel Air, Cisco Ubiquitous, and so on, indicate that companies that are big on Wi-Fi are being big on small cells now, whether it's femto, pico, micro, doesn't matter. There's over 1 million femto cells in at least 2 networks worldwide, others to follow closer to home. So the name change wasn't because femto cells weren't happening, it was because there was a wider picture.
If I can just add, from standards point of view, there are lots of different features which 3GPP is actually bringing in just to make this simpler and easier. So as I pointed out, the future, the LTA is like a future. So you will have the same the core, and you can actually have small cells, and there are features coming which will allow not only improving the traffic, the way the traffic flows and things like that, so it doesn't overload the core network, because which was the problem. So this is all going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
My question is then, since 2007, mid-2007, I could authenticate my iPhone on 7,500 hotspots in the UK seamlessly using Mac authentication. The question is, why is it taking us such a long period of time? We're talking about 6 years, and we still do not have ubiquitous connectivity. So why is that? Because the mobile devices are not the best, especially if you wear glasses, to authenticate, go to the landing page and do all the username and password. Why is it taking too long?
Yeah, I think it's to a lot of extent it's been reluctance on the part of the operators who were not very sure, like, because there have been issues talked about is the interference, right, with the 3G. So from what I hear, and I have been told today that that's actually not the case by Errol, but from what I knew, that in 3G, you have this concept of dedicated and the shared carrier. Because if you use the shared carrier, it would generate interference. It would have black spots where, because if it's a closed small cell or closed femtocell, other users cannot actually use. But these things may not be true. So I think it has been a bit of reluctance on the part of operators. But the things are changing, especially if you have read about AT&T, they are doing something similar. So they have got a massive rollout plan with these small cells because they face some similar problems in the US. Even though it's like a big country, you can have areas which has got very, very few number of people. And what you want to do is you want to provide coverage there. Or you want to have certain areas where there are a lot of people, but there is no capacity, and you put a small cell to provide capacity. And another one of the things which was asked about energy saving. So along with this, there is this feature called the self-organizing networks. And one of the features in that is energy saving. And what it does is, like, when you have hotspots where you input these small cells can be done like a soft switch off when it's off peak time to basically save the energy. And because it's an off peak, the users can actually be handed over to the macro. So yes, there are lots of developments in the standards, and they will be coming soon. It all depends on how enterprising the operators are, how willing they are to try these new features.
Was your question particularly about carrier Wi-Fi? Yes. Yeah, I thought so. So the technology is quite easy. It's not, the pieces of the technology have been there for a while. I think the hard bit is actually getting the whole of the ecosystem behind it. And some of that is operator reluctance, but a lot of it is it's just intrinsically hard to get all the devices singing from the same hymn sheet, as it were. I suspect you're a relatively expert user and you know how to configure things and are prepared to go through a bit of pain in the process. That doesn't work for most people. You can't even ask all users to install a client piece of software on their phone. It needs to come out of the box, working. And getting that kind of change all the way through the ecosystem just takes years. I think it's coming.
George Rodriguez from the Scottish Government, and I would like to throw to the floor a couple of topics related with the 2020 digital 2020 objectives defined by the government, and such as. On my point of view, there are two aspects that may be considered for these objectives, and the first one is definitely increasing productivity, and there's a second aspect to it, which is making sure that the digital divide is minimized, and both of these objectives have got specific items to be looked at, which may be and are definitely different. From what was discussed here, I would throw it into discussion. One of them is, so on the basis that what could be done from now towards these objectives and putting it into the perspective of what the government can be done and what sort of relationship should be established with the stakeholders. One of them has got to do with the infrastructures. Sharing of infrastructures. We've discussed here some of the aspects. One of the topics is licensing, is site licensing. I would like to have comments. You may have in relation to that that can help improve the situation. Would you, I've heard Raheem speaking about the, methods of improving efficiency of site sharing. If any further comments on that could be presented here, would be interesting. There's now another topic related with this, which has to do with productivity. Is there anything that you think could be done in terms of approaching corporations, enterprises, industries towards understanding what their needs are and improving the use of the 4G coming 4G, for instance, and thirdly, literacy, digital literacy. What can be done in relation to that? So that's my contribution.
I try to answer some of the questions. There was lots of questions. But I think in order to minimize this digital divide, the government needs to put money towards it and get the return on the investment over the time in order to help the service provider to roll out the network much quicker. And I think that it is important for the government to realize that broadband communication is not only fiber optics technology, is a combination of wireless, fixed, mobile, as well as the fiber optics, and to some extent satellite. If it is, especially if you want to look at, because I'm a satellite engineer initially. If you look at Ator Hebrides, sort of like that sort of areas, I know there are not big population density there, but it is a big gap in the coverage from the terrestrial systems. So it is a combination of different technologies. And politicians, unfortunately, think that fiber optics is the broadband communication. No, fiber optics plus wireless. And it is not only from the economic point of view, which one is cost effective. Wireless by nature is more reliable than fiber optics is. And that factor is important to be considered. For example, if the fiber optics goes down, it is not available, it takes a long time for that to come up again. Whereas wireless is much shorter time of unavailability of the wireless. Have you had the experience of your fiber optics, your TV cable to your home? When it rains, when it's hot, when it's cold, the service goes? So that sort of thing is not very much of a problem for wireless side. The fade is very temporary. You'll get your chance. So, and okay, here we are.
Now,
go ahead.
I just want to say how much I agree with Raheem on all of his points. No, I really do. I really do. It does take that mix. But the other thing I wanted to say is a really tough question to answer, though, because it's a big one, is I actually think you've made a really good start, because if I understand right the kind of vision that you've set out, it is just that. It's a vision, it's a set of principles, it's a view of a thing to be achieved. And I think it's far better to have that than to have a specific plan, actually. To have a prescriptive, we're going to deliver an infrastructure that looks like this many cells and this many cables in this many locations, because that'll be out of date before you know it. And technology will move on ahead, and the risk is of constraining that. So I think, stick to the vision and the principles and the things you'd like to achieve, and put in place incentives for people to come and achieve it, by all means. But the way that it's achieved, I think there's a real risk of getting hung up on LTE advanced versus LTE, or Wi-Fi versus small cells, or whatever, because that will happen in the globe as a whole, and there's a real risk of backing the wrong horses there.
So just a little bit to add to that, and I agree with the principle that it's really energizing to have a vision, and the thing about a vision is you don't know exactly how you're going to get there, or if you did, it would be something other than a vision. But I think it is important to set some metricated goals, and I think you'll correct me if I've got it wrong, but it was something like 50% of government workers being able to work flexibly. I can't remember what the date was, but certainly there seemed to be an ambitious target for having people working remotely. And with the right financial incentives, etc., and we've got a basic economic fact that all this costs money to roll out, but the combination of being clear about targets and having some investment behind it will really help start to make the vision a reality. You do need something, I think, as a sort of some stepping stones or some stakes in the ground that are stretching, that will actually energise people towards doing something different.
Claire?
Hi, yep. Claire Mack from Ofcom in Scotland. I'm interested in what Simon was saying about the kind of changing ecosystem, and I agree that it is, but one of the key issues for us in Scotland is the geographic coverage and how to put coverage in places where actually there aren't very many people at all. So I'm really interested in any views on basically any interest of the MNOs that they might have in talking to the smaller community groups. We had a discussion in Parliament last week with politicians, and 2 or 3 of them approached us and said, I've got a man in my community who knows radio, and he's going to just do this for me. He's going to put a repeater up and consistently, have to explain about the legalities of that, and, doing 90 miles an hour on a road where nobody else is still illegal, as is putting a repeater anywhere. So I'm interested in what the attitude might be from the MNOs to this, putting the technology in the hands of the people, allowing people to use your networks potentially and to share them, or is it, should that happen at all, or should it be that the integrity of the network is paramount for you?
Oh, that's the first time I've come across the concept of DIYing onto our networks, which I've learnt something today. So I'll be interested in other colleagues if they've got specific comments on that. I think I would stick with what I said. I think the more that we can do to work with government and work collaboratively with other MNOs to find ways of providing solutions with the economics that we can all afford, that would feel like the best solution. And I think there is a willingness. It's not. This is not just a Scottish issue. This is a worldwide issue as the whole world becomes much more of a digital society. So we have to find ways to do this, because the demand will be there, and we'll need to find ways.
I think you put 2 things in opposition there. The sort of do-it-yourself part of the network and preserving the integrity of the network. And I don't think they need be in opposition. I happen to think that Ofcom's got absolutely the right policy on repeaters, which are a lousy technological solution. There is the question as to how come the FCC finds a way to make repeaters in the hands of consumers work. But I think there are actually some good reasons, which we won't go into now. But I'm going to talk about femtocells because I do think they're an interesting example of that. You allow people to deploy a part of your network, but that network still integrates with your core network. You still have oversight of it, you still set the policies for it, and it absolutely can preserve the integrity in that process. That's only one point solution that's there today, but that general concept that it's okay for parts of the network to be deployed by end users where they know it's needed. When you look at the coverage map, however detailed it is, you can never tell if a particular location is served. You'll look up on the customer service database and say, according to my database, your postcode is well served. But fine rightly that in your basement it isn't, or behind your thickly walled tenement it isn't. And knowing about that helps. And actually the problem with the sparsely populated areas isn't actually the cost per se of a solution, it's the cost per person. So the answer to that is finding solutions which are small enough that they scale down to a single person by some means or another. So if you can do both of those, you preserve the integrity of the network, but put it in the hands of the user with a solution that scales up and down, then I think you can bring those two situations together.
Do you want to just a quick, and then I probably need to wrap up just about now. So do you
Okay.
want to
Just to add that one because the problem is the cost of the coverage. So as a regulator, did you say you're from Ofcom? You need to allocate low part of the spectrum more for the backhaul as well as for the radio access in order to reach the corners that is economically difficult to cover by high frequency bands.
Sorry, just comment on a point.
Martin Wallace, O2. We have, as Telefonica, have experimented with giving users access to their own network service with giffgaff, which was a unique pilot or concept we did a couple of years ago. And Sarah, do you know the numbers we've got on giffgaff now? If you can remember. It's large. Okay, it's large amount of users, but the service layer is actually taken over by the users. So the users actually help themselves out, create wikis, create self-help groups to help with common day problems. And all we do is provide the network layer and the SIM cards, and then everything else is taken over by them. And it's been a good success. So we've already kind of experimented in that area, whether giving the network over to users to then do whatever they want. I mean, Sky's been a great example in Scotland with broadband, with the stuff they've done with the repeaters across the island. But anything's possible. But that's not the official view of O2. That's my own personal view. Thanks.
Sorry, you wanted to make a quick point.
Just a very quick point. This I have seen this some live deployments in Sri Lanka where they have a similar issue, and what they do is they have something like a microcell, which is solar powered and it's backhauled via satellite. Well, you can get really bad data rates, which are like GPRS data rates. But the thing is, the concept works. Of course, sun might be a bit of a problem here, but if you solve the electricity issue, it is possible. Thanks.
Okay, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. This is a kind of a multifaceted and knotty problem, I think. Actually, we don't have a lot of sun in Scotland, but we do have 25% of Europe's tidal energy potential. So we have got lots of energy solutions. Thanks for all your contributions. Thank you to the panelists. Mike, I think you wanted to say a brief word.
Thanks very much. I mean, the first thing I learned today is that mobile experts are like economists, because they always say for every 4 economists you have 5 opinions. Now, who's got the 5 on that panel? I'll leave you to conclude for yourselves. But I think a very interesting, very valuable discussion. Some of the things I took from it. The first thing is the very positive stuff that actually, with all the technological solutions changing, lots of opportunities are developing, and the pace of rollout on 4G, on which we're very much reliant on O2 and other players in the audience to make it happen in Scotland. From a government perspective, lots of food for thought. Some of them removing barriers, planning kept coming up. Some of it about understanding the dynamically developing nature of the market and the operators. And thirdly, actually having active dialogue with market players in a way that might move things forward. And recognizing that you need to combine a vision with some pragmatic steps that signal that you're serious about getting to the vision without closing things off in a way which is too precise and not future-proofed. For me, the phrase of the day is, I think, the lamp grab, and I think we need to think a lot about that. So I think it's been a really interesting and useful set of sort of contributions which will piece into the jigsaw, and all I'd like to do to end is to thank John and the panel for everything they brought to it. So thank you very much indeed.